Just a few weeks ago in Rome, I saw the movie Agora. Now it's coming out in the States, I think, on May the 28th. Agora is the story of Hypatia. Hypatia was a philosopher who lived in late 4th, early 5th century Alexandria, and she was put to death supposedly by a mob of Christians in the year 415. The legend of Hypatia, along with the story of Giordano Bruno and Galileo, is probably the favorite story of anti-religious ideologues. She's a kind of patron saint of reason in its battle against religion. I first heard the story of Hypatia when I was a kid. I was a teenager and I was watching Carl Sagan's program Cosmos. You might remember that show from the 70s. It was very popular. It was like a 10-part series on the history of science. And the show, in fact, comes to its climax, the last episode, with Sagan's recounting of the story of Hypatia. Here was Hypatia, this great figure supporting reason and science. She ran afoul of Cyril of Alexandria, who was the Christian bishop of the city. And Cyril, along with his kind of wicked confreres, had her brutally put to death. Sagan said that when mobs later came, to destroy the Library of Alexandria, there was no one there to stop them because Hypatia had been put to death. Then he adds melodramatically, and they made Cyril a saint. Now, Carl Sagan's story is grounded in a much older tradition, going back to Gibbon's in the famous book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is a deeply anti-Christian book. Now, here's the thing. The story of Hypatia, as I've recounted it, told by Carl Sagan and Gibbons, and now in this new movie, is almost completely wrong. She was, in fact, a philosopher. She was, in fact, an intellectual. She was killed by a mob in 415, but almost everything else about the story is false. If you want all the details of this debunking, look at David Bentley Hart's book called Atheist Delusions. You get the full story. But I'll just say a couple quick things. In the film, of course, a mob of hysterical Christians is shown sacking the Library of Alexandria. Well, the Library of Alexandria was destroyed not by a Christian mob in the 4th century or 5th century. It was destroyed by the troops of Julius Caesar some 40 years before Jesus was born. At the time of Hypatia, there was a temple to the god Serapis built on that site called the Serapeon, and Christian mobs did come and sack that building, probably in retaliation for other things that was done to them. But it was not the burning down of this great center of learning on the part of hysterical Christian primitives. What happened to Hypatia was probably more of a political event. She was caught between Orestes, who was the kind of secular leader of the city, and Cyril, who was the bishop of Alexandria, and she got caught in the middle of that fight. She was probably killed in retaliation for attacks on some of Cyril's people. Anyway, I'm not exculpating anybody. I'm not trying to make excuses for this violence. This building was sacked. She was, in fact, put to death. Christians should always follow the one who said, love your enemies, turn the other cheek, etc. So I'm not trying to exonerate anybody. But I would say this. The presentation of it as a battle between science and sweet reason on the one hand, and this sort of hysterical, primitive, superstitious Christianity on the other hand, is just for the birds. Hypatia, though the movie portrays her more as an astronomer, probably to accentuate the link to Galileo, Hypatia was a philosopher in the Neoplatonist tradition. Well, at the time, a number of Christian bishops were in her circle of friends. Christians attended her classes with great enthusiasm. And more to it, some of the leading Christian philosophers and theologians of that time and prior to Hypatia were passionate Neoplatonists. Think of St. Augustine, maybe as the most famous example, or of Origen of Alexandria, who predates Hypatia, but it comes from her city. Christians were passionate about their Neoplatonism. Again, the insinuation that she somehow represents reason over and against mouth-breathing Christian primitives is just a calumny. And it fits in with this sort of Galileo vision of reality, which is so popular among a lot of atheists, but it has very little to do with reality. Now, none of this, though, gets to the heart of what I disapproved of in this movie. There's one scene that stays in my mind in particular. The camera is drawn up to this very high point of vantage over the Alexandria library when it's being sacked by, Christians. And what you see from that vantage point are basically cockroaches scurrying around. The Christians are made to look like little insects who have invaded this place. A little bit later in the movie, we see Christians stirring up a mob violence against Jews. And the way the director frames the shot of the corpses of Jews who've been killed is made to look exactly like the scenes from Dachau and Auschwitz that we become familiar with. The not so subtle point is that Christians are dangerous types. In fact, at the limit, they're like vermin that ought to be exterminated. Now, see, what struck me as I watched this movie, and I'm just squirming in my seat the whole time, was, doesn't he realize, and the director is a guy named Alejandro Amenabar, who's made a number of very anti-religious movies. Doesn't he realize that a movie like this is actually going to foment, or could, foment violence against Christians? Talk about a dehumanizing portrayal of a group of people. And this is from a guy, I suppose, who would claim, he's for tolerance and open-mindedness and inclusivity. But here are Christians being portrayed in the most vile way, and I can't help but see they would foster violence against Christians. What's bugging me is that the popular atheism the last 10 years that I've spoken out against many times, Hitchens and Dawkins and company, that this kind of vile and unintelligent atheism has found its way now into the broader reaches of the popular culture. And see, what it's going to do is cause not just intellectual problems. I think it's going to cause real political and real social problems. What can we Christians do? I think all we can do is stand our ground. We have to resist this characterization. We have to keep setting the record straight.